Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and I am back with our Pokemon Draft Premier League Week 1 breakdown. So in this breakdown, I'm just going to be giving a high-level overview of each match, not a play-by-play recap of what happened, because I assume you guys all saw it. Just a quick little reminder, and also I will be naming my match of the week. In future weeks, this will be open to any coach that wants to do a breakdown, and they can do it in any style that they want, or I might just handle it every week if there's not interest in it. Either way really works. But with that being said, let's go ahead and look at our first match. So we had the match between Solenoid and Chaos Knight Rider. This was... I have this as the first match on my list because it was, without a doubt, the most unique of the matches played, I believe. There wasn't a sort of gotcha tech that stole a game. There wasn't any sort of like amazing offensive output that just steamrolled anything. All three games were just defensive clinics put on by both coaches with a really switch-heavy play style, trying to eke out small advantages and then claim a late-game Dynamax advantage and win off of that. In two of the games, Solenoid was able to do that with Tapu Fini and Ferrothorn being, I think, the key pivot points, and in fact he dropped his Landorus, which was his other pivoter, for the Gallade at one point, and the Gallade really performed because it threatened that Obstagoon with close combat. So I think that this game was fantastic to watch, and Chaos Knight Rider's Obstagoon was very impressive throughout the series, especially with the fire coverage to cover that Ferrothorn, which otherwise gave his team a lot of problems, but it was also soft to a body press from the Ferrothorn. So there was a really interesting dichotomy of positioning from both sides, and I think that led to some of this defensive play. And I don't think that there were any times there was a switch I just outright disagreed with. Solenoid did try to make, I think, one hard read on a switch, and it didn't happen. But beyond that, like, a switch never fully got punished. It was just advantages being eked out, and each of them in a game eking out just smaller advantages until one of them took the outright lead. But in this next game, it was me versus Flamingo. This was a game where I had some pretty standard sets, and he had some very off-the-wall sets, and his Cofagrigus was Calm Mind with a lot of special attack investment, and that was an absolutely great set. It did a lot more damage than I would have expected, and really made the end games a lot harder for me, especially relying on the Metagross. But speaking of the Metagross, even in a situation where it was a 1v4, Metagross shouldn't be counted out because it almost pulled off a 1v4 comeback, because Metagross is a very, very strong Pokemon. His Game 1 call of Weakness Policy Rotom was exceptional. I wasn't expecting the Surf Tauros after I saw Bulldoze on it. I thought it was going to be an Icy Wind set, but Bulldoze made sense next to a Rotom as well. But Surf was a great call to get that Weakness Policy proc and to let the Rotom just start doing a lot of damage. And then in Game 2, his targeting of Dragalge early, that was a great identification of a threat. And although I had EV'd to live a Life Orb Quake, I did not EV to live a Coaching Quake. So that was a really good offensive call to take down that Dragalge. So this one was a 2-0 victory for Flamingo. In Matt versus Otto, this just in, Rillaboom is still a pretty good Pokemon, even if it's pretty vanilla at times. But Choice Band, it outputs so much damage. And there were times where I thought Otto's early game actually put a lot of pressure on Matt, but the late game Rillaboom, Matt did well enough to leverage to come back from a few borderline losing positions. I don't want to say they were lost positions, but ones where I felt like Otto definitely had an advantage. Mailstick and Primarina's damage output is still really high, but it's just a rough matchup for those two against Rillaboom. Otto was having to rely probably a lot more on the Torn than he thought he would, and that let Matt pivot into a Trick Room mode as well, which could really take advantage of that Torn. So it was solid prep from both of them, but it just felt like the matchup advantage was in Matt's favor. And this is the kind of match I would have loved to see late season instead of early season, when they both had a better grasp of what was going on with their teams, and they had a lot of playoff positioning on the line, because I think that these two coaches will both be pretty clearly playoff contenders this season. But Matt did take this one 2-0. And then our last 2-0 match, we had Easy Max versus Gumi. That says targeting was exceptional. It says exceptional because Maxwell's targeting was phenomenal throughout the entire set, and it really exposed some of the potential problems with Gumi's team. But one thing that really shocked me was that Gumi's damage output seemed to be on the low side, which he's got the Regigigas Sun Charizard team, so I wasn't prepared to see that his damage output seemed low. I said, is Blacephalon a tank? Because Blacephalon actually lived a hit, and I've never actually seen that before. So congratulations to Blacephalon. It was a big move on his part. And the thing that I was most happy about in this match was seeing the Morpeko, because I always say that Morpeko's, I think, is underrated in draft because Aura Wheel is such a good move. And I was happy to see that it showed up the set and it did what it was asked to do, which wasn't carry, but it did just enough of a lot of things to set the late game sweeps up for Maxwell. So this was a 2-0 win for Maxwell, and it was probably the most one-sided of the 2-0s this week. There are 3 of them. The other 2, they felt like there was at least one competitive game in the set, but this one, it felt pretty one-sided this week. But I really don't expect that from Gumi moving forward, because we know that he is a very good coach with a history of high-level finishes, and I expect him to continue moving in that direction as well. Up next, we got Snoot and Sakimoto. This is the cool tech game of the week, where we've got the Max Klefki, which conceptually really cool. In practice, I don't actually know if the damage output's good enough. And I still don't know after this match if Max Klefki's damage output is good enough. On Snoot's end, Blastoise and Xurkitree put in some work, and you saw Hatterene on the first page. That was able to come in, give him some speed control threats, set up his Pokemon late game. Overall, his team just worked really well together. But watching the set from both of their perspectives, the Jolteon seemed like the best thing that Sakimoto had going for him. And I was surprised that he was still trying to force Dynamax the Klefki, when, to me, Dynamaxing the Jolteon every game seemed to make sense. Maybe that's just from my perspective, but that's something that I would have been looking more to instead of the Klefki, just given the matchup and the nature of Blastoise. The Articuno game was actually really solid, and I was impressed by Articuno, and I do think it's my dark horse pick for Saki's MVP this season. I think it is an exceptional Pokemon, and his team is well positioned to take advantage of it. But this one was a 2-1 win for Snoot on the basis of really good synergistic play, and then Hatterene, Blastoise, and Xurkitree working well together. Up next, we've got Dina versus Ryan, and that is Dina, not Dinah. I've been told that I would be physically harmed if I called her Dinah, so Dina. But Mesprit, and I put an extra I in there because I always want to call it Mespirit instead of Mesprit. Game 1, it was exceptional. The Nasty Plot set up from Ryan, it just had all the coverage it needed, had really high damage output. That was just a very, very solid game 1 from Ryan. But on Dina's end, she had to pivot away because game 1 did not go her way. However, the game 2 and 3 pivot to her faster mode with Diggersby and Rotom was absolutely fantastic. That was 100% the call on her end. And speaking of Diggersby, that thing does so much damage. Like, that was an insane amount of damage. On paper for Ryan, the Iron Defense Leftovers Araquanid looked really, really good, but in practice it didn't work as well because Dina did pivot away from her Glastrier sets pretty early, and she was able to really leverage that Rotom against it. Like, the Araquanid was still good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as good as you would have thought it would be on paper looking at this matchup. After that, we have C-Rad and Cortex. Oh, I forgot to mention, Dina took that match 2-1. vsryan, and cortex. Physical Tapu Koko looked great this week, but I was surprised that there was no Thievul with it, given how good Thievul looked in the matchup. You know, potential foul play into Marowak, knockoff into Marowak. It could have Snarls. It could have Howl for the Physical Koko. I just thought it looked good this week, looking at the matchup, and I was surprised not to see it. But one of the most impressive things I thought was the way Cortex adjusted to turn 1 for Game 2, based off of how poorly turn 1 for Game 1 went for him. And I think that adjustment, being as solid as it was, plus dodging an Electro Web, really set him up to leverage his powerful Mons in the late game, and set him up to have a potentially much more convincing set with the late game. But again, I'm looking at Charles's team, and the Raichu this week seemed a little questionable. Like, yes, 2 electric types will not put a lot of damage, but that just really leaves your offensive mode soft to the Marowak with Lightning Rod. So I'm still not sure if Raichu was the best call over Thievul, and I'm sure that there will be a bit of internal deliberation from Charles about that as well, but that was just my 2 cents on it looking at the matchup. And then my game of the week this week was Goomer versus Tay. Special Dragonite was fantastic this week, so was the Guzzlord with fire coverage, thinking the Skarmory could come, which it did, and Skarmory still did a lot of work. And then Game 3, that calling that he was going to go for the hard Colossal play with the Aqua Jet and the Coal, and then hoping that the Scarf Boltund was going to be fast enough to outspeed the Coal. That was just a thing of absolute beauty. Probably the coolest single play this week, and part of why this is my game of the week. The leveraging of the Guzzlord and Dragonite early games in Game 1 and 2, and then just that Scarf Boltund winning Game 3 functionally on turn 1. I mean, there was still a game to be played, but putting yourself in such a winning position in Game 3. I think both of these coaches are phenomenal. We've got a 2-time VDL champion, a 2-time UGA Grand champion. So this was looking like it was going to be a banger matchup, and it, like basically every other match this week, did not disappoint. The only potential criticism I have of this match is looking at Tay's prep is there may not have been enough overall offensive punch, but I think compared to Goomer's team, his team also isn't exceptionally bulky, so there was probably enough to threaten just enough one-shots. I haven't done all the calcs, and I assume they were all done well, but it did require a high level of execution from Tay, which he was able to maintain. It felt like he had the advantage throughout Game 1 and 2, but Goomer was able to steal one of them, and then Game 3 he went for the Coal play, and Goomer called it with that Boltund play, which I still say is the best play this week. But thank you guys so much for watching this week's weekly recap, and we'll see if I'm doing it next week or if we're going to have another coach do it. But I'm looking forward to week 2 matches, which should be starting pretty soon. So without any further ado, I will see you guys next time. Bye.